Labor unions, by definition, are anti-labor. They actively seek to restrict the supply of labor and prevent non-member labor from competing. They do not support labor and workers at large. They only support in-group labor. Unions historically discriminated against immigrant and African American labor, as these two groups were comprised of large numbers of unskilled workers. Unions also used fatal violence against competing workers. Today, unions still fight against unskilled labor and use the government to threaten violence on their behalf. Unions are labor cartels. A cartel is a group of producers of a good or service who collude to restrict supply in order to increase the price they can charge. This allows for the maximization of profits. It solidifies multiple producers into a monopoly. In the absence of government support, cartels do not survive in a free market. This is because cartel members have an incentive to deviate from the agreement in order to sell more goods, in this case, labor, by lowering the price and outcompeting fellow cartel members. But when the government enforces a cartel agreement, it survives because no one is allowed to deviate from the agreement. That is the case with labor cartels. Labor cartels, like most anti-free market endeavors, benefit the few at the expense of the many. In the case of unions, the only people who benefit from the institution are those who are voluntarily in it, and of course, the politicians and activists who score political points. Every single person in the country besides these groups is harmed by unions. Unions restrict the supply of labor in an industry by creating barriers to entry, for example, licensing. This inward shift of the labor supply curve results in higher than normal market wages for the union members. It also results in unemployment and deadweight loss. The inefficiency that results when voluntary and mutually beneficial transactions are artificially prevented from occurring. Unions can also change benefits and working conditions for their members. These are essentially just non-pecuniary wage increases. As a result, unions harm many individuals. These groups include 1. Those who become unemployed when unions restrict the labor supply. Unions increase wages for their members, but as a consequence, they force others to become unemployed. Barriers to entry keep other workers out of the market. Employers lay people off or don't expand hiring because it is now too expensive to do so. While some see their wages increase because of unions, others become unemployed and have no wage at all. 2. Businesses who are faced with higher input prices. This is particularly harmful for smaller businesses that have low profit margins or businesses that close because they can no longer compete on an interstate or international level. 3. Consumers of goods and services who are faced with higher prices. Consumers, from the rich to the poor, are the ones paying for union demands. 4. Union workers who are involuntarily members. The law allows unions to force others to join their group and pay membership dues if they want to pursue a career in some union fields. This results in people being forced to associate with a group and prevents them from associating with an employer to separately create a voluntary employment arrangement. Fundamental rights, like association rights and the ability to make a living, are harmed by unions. 5. Workers in non-union industries are also harmed. These workers are faced with lower wages because they must work in non-union jobs when union-created unemployment sets in. The unemployed workers who used to work in the now union jobs are trying to find work in non-union jobs that can actually hire them. And people who can't even get a union job in the first place because there are barriers to entry now have to get a job in non-union industries. This increases the supply of labor in non-union sectors and results in lower wages in those sectors. This is basic supply and demand at work. For every union member that gets above market wages, another non-union worker sees their paycheck decline. It is not equitable that a small group of people can both force others to join and prevent others from joining their group by engaging in rent-seeking behavior with the government. The people helped by unions are very noticeable. We know their names. We know their experiences. We can see their pay and benefit improvements. The countless people harmed by unions are not so perceptible, but that does not make them any less of a reality. We don't directly see the unemployment caused by unions. We don't recognize the higher prices we face are the result of unions. We don't notice that unions may have caused our neighbor's wage to decrease or our bills to cost more. This is why people don't realize the harm of unions, because the benefits are easier to see than the detriments. But make no mistake, the benefit of union efforts is far outweighed by the cost. Union supporters try to justify the disequilibrium of supply and demand. For example, they say that without unions, there wouldn't be a 40-hour work week and good quality jobs. This is not supported by historical data. Leisure is a normal good, meaning that as one's wage increases, so does the amount of time they desire to spend not working. In the late 1800s, the free market created massive increases in real wages for the common person. As a result of this, the number of hours people worked started to decline. Wages kept rising, hours worked kept declining, and conditions kept improving up to around the 1930s when labor regulations first started being promulgated. If the free market was left to continue on its own, it would have gotten to a 40-hour work week, or more likely, a work week where people's utility was maximized even more. In fact, before unions, some businesses voluntarily limited work week hours to 40. Other businesses did not do this. Many poor people in the early 1900s wanted to work more than 40 hours a week because they needed all the money they could get. A free market maximizes the optimal rate of leisure and labor for individuals. It improves worker utility and the working conditions of all people. Competition has proven to be an effective tool for improving the lot of workers and could be the subject of its own video. Pro-labor cartel regulations help the politicians and voluntary union members at the expense of everyone else. Another claim of unions is that there needs to be organized labor to balance the unequal bargaining power that creates low wages and poor conditions. In a free market, bargaining power has nothing to do with wages or working conditions. In a competitive market, employers and businesses are price takers, not price makers. The market is controlled by supply and demand forces that set the rate, not individuals. If an employer deviates from the market wage and benefit rate, they will lose money or go out of business. If an employer has monopsony-like power, the solution is not to give labor a monopoly. The solution is to create competition. Unions argue that organized labor is a public good and therefore has positive externalities on society. They say that if there were right-to-work laws, then the benefits unions bargain for would also go to those who aren't in the union and didn't work for them. This is only true because the government dictates that unions speak for everyone else via the Wagner Act. Get rid of these types of labor laws, and union bargain for benefits would not affect anyone else but the unions. Aside from pragmatic concerns, there are deep moral questions surrounding unions. Unions get special legal privileges and protections from the government. The threat of force from the government backs up these special privileges. Unions use the government to prevent association, force association, and restrict the freedom to contract. The government has no legitimacy in violating the fundamental right of association. In a free society, individuals, not the government, decide who they interact with and how. There is nothing wrong with unions that don't rely on any special legal protections and interact purely on a voluntary basis with everyone. The solutions to poor economic conditions of workers are not found in new laws or the messianic claims of unions. For many union members, their ears become deaf when faced with criticism. Union members have a strong psychological attachment to the group that has helped them as an individual. But they fail to see the forest through the trees. If you want to see your wages increase, don't coerce others by using government force to prop up labor cartels. There has never been a system in all of human history that has been so invariably successful as capitalism at lifting the masses out of poverty. Economics is not a zero-sum game. You can help yourself without harming others.